Hello, everyone, and welcome to this special podcast with Argent and Influence to celebrate the upcoming launch of Unstoppable Game new game Influence. So we have here Chris, CEO and founders at Unstoppable Games. Great to have you here. And we have Julian, founder and CSO at Argent. I think many of our audience know Argent already. We are the largest smart wallet on Starknet for users, but also multi-sig for teams. And so today we'll spend much more time focusing on Unstoppable Game and their upcoming launch. So let's get started with you, Chris. Maybe can you give us an intro of Influence? What's around the corner?
Yeah, absolutely. So Influence is a space strategy game. It's an MMO, massively multiplayer online game. It's a highly strategic and social game, and it's been in development for about 3 years, since 2021. We're building a what we call Unstoppable Game, thus the name of our studio. And really the intention is to build a game that can't be turned off, that ultimately the community will run and operate in the long term. That was kind of a vision that I've had for a long time now. I was always fascinated by the idea that could happen. Even as far back, it's probably 15 plus years ago, I was building mods for a game that I'm sure many of you don't know, but it was called Open Transport Tycoon. It was this open source clone of an old game that's probably 30 years old now that I loved. And it was kind of the first time I thought about this idea that you could have a game that could kind of outlive its developer and kind of continue on indefinitely. Always been fascinated by that idea. Throughout my time also playing a lot of EVE Online and getting inspired by its setting in space, inspired also by the setting in the Expanse. It's kind of led me up to this point where we started building Influence, and now we're a week away from launch, so it's a really exciting time.
Awesome. Yeah, we have been following the development, and I think you should call it a massively multiplayer on-chain game. I think that will be the new MMO. Yeah. I think there's so many questions on how you guys got there and what makes it unique, but should we start maybe by showing to the audience the game and maybe have a quick demo, and then we can dive into it?
Absolutely, I'd love to. All right, so this is Influence. This is currently our pre-release client, which has been running for about 3 months now. We had about 2,000 people playing in this client. That's on Sepolia, which of course you can play with ArgentX or Web Wallet. It is still live now if you want to jump in and start to get familiar. But this is our setting. So what you're looking at is the asteroid belt. All of these little white dots are asteroids in the asteroid belt around the star Adelia. Really quickly, the backstory behind Influence is that somewhat in the future, humans on Earth, groups of humans on Earth decided to take these generational ships to other star systems. They were looking for a better life. Things were not great back on Earth or on Mars, and they were looking for a place to settle. Our unlucky group was actually thrown off course, and Adelia was about the only place they could reach. Adelia has 5 planets, but they quickly figured out that they were all uninhabitable and decided that their only real option was to ditch into the asteroid belt. They didn't have to deal with heavy gravity. They didn't have to deal with these like noxious gases on these planets. So it was kind of their best option. So they took this huge generational ship and they deconstructed it. And what they ultimately did was settle at the largest asteroid in the belt, which is called Adelia Prime, fittingly. And so what you're seeing here now is buildings. There are 1.7 million square kilometers of space on Adelia Prime. And each of those square kilometers is a buildable lot. So all these little blue dots now you're seeing are buildable lots on the surface. These few that are white are mine that I control. But this is kind of the center, the starting point of the colony Adelia Prime on pre-release. And it has grown from there. You can take a look and see that there are several different icons. I can filter these and show that more easily. There are several different classes of buildings. And the core idea here is that you as a player are settling on an asteroid. You're building extractors. You're finding where there are valuable deposits on the surface. You're extracting the material, and you're working your way up through production chains, ultimately to build ships and more buildings to kind of expand and land grab across this asteroid belt. You can see here is my ship, Bicycle, and it's sitting on the surface. Oh, there it is in all its glory. But the really cool part is that you're not stuck here on Adelia Prime. The whole intent is for these settlers to spread out into the belt and really take advantage and exploit all of the materials that are available in the belt. So if I kind of zoom back out, you can see all of these different asteroids. They're all unique. They all have their own uniquely defined orbital periods, trajectories, tilts, and they all actually orbit independently. So if I fast forward things a little bit, you'll see that the belt is always moving. And all of these individual asteroids are all moving separately from each other. So you have this kind of like always changing, very dynamic, strategic setting because the travel between the asteroids is also quite realistic. So if you're sitting here on Adelia Prime and you want to take a trip to another asteroid that's nearby, you have to compete with the fact that you're dealing with the rocket equation. And that means you're pushing a lot of heavy stuff, including your propellant, which you have to bring across the belt. And you have this kind of what we call a pork chop chart that helps you define these routes. But they take real time, days, real time. And so it's a really important piece of planning to make sure that you're figuring out when is the best time, over the course of potentially weeks or months, to move your goods from your asteroid back to a market, to pick things up from the market, bring them back to your asteroid, and so on. So we're really, really excited to see like all of the different emergent strategies that pop up in Influence. But that's hopefully a good intro into what exactly Influence is at its core.
Thanks, Chris. I mean, just looking at it, the quality and the production value put in it get us really excited for the launch. Maybe if we take a step back on, I love that you explained it without mentioning basically blockchain or anything. It's really about the game experience. But we hear about Web3 games, we hear about on-chain game, we hear about Web 2.5 games. Mm-hmm. How would you say Influence differentiate from other blockchain games in your approach?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think, we've seen a lot of different approaches. Many of them have been focused purely on, I think, the fundraising aspect. They identified that it's a good way for them to raise money, and a lot of them just sort of disappeared, unfortunately. We've always tried to be much more direct about what our plans are. We've been building out in the open for the last 3 years. But I think what makes us really unique is that we are fully on chain. And we've been envisioned as a fully on chain game since 2021, when we launched the first 2 collections on L1. What that means, fully on chain, for us is that all of the game's logic and all of the game's state lives on chain. So when you saw those orbital trajectories between 2 asteroids, if I took my ship and actually sent it on its way, that would be a transaction. And the origin and destination of that, all of it validated fully on chain, proved on Starknet, and ultimately persisted on L1. So I think that's really unique. There are a handful of us now that are building fully on chain, but I think the key thing that does, and the key reason we started as a fully on chain game, was because we want that unstoppability. That be able to say to our community, if you start playing, as long as there's a community around influence that wants to keep playing, they never have to stop. Regardless of what we do, they can keep playing indefinitely. And I think that's really, really cool. Obviously, there's some other benefits, right? Like influence can be imagined as a game that is set in this Adalian universe. And there are asteroids and crewmates and sway, which is the currency coming next week. And those pieces are also all on chain and also fully owned by players. In no way do we control them. Even when people are playing influence, they're just using their assets in influence. They're not depositing them. We're never taking custody of them. So it's this fully on-chain, unstoppable, and non-custodial game, which I think gives us a lot of really great functionality and great kind of future-proofing for the community.
Isn't there also sorry?
I just wanted to ask you a question, Julian, actually.
I just wanted to bounce on that first. Isn't there also an aspect of composability? Because as you mentioned, you're building a universe and you've decided of a story in that universe. Mm-hmm. But if users have their own assets, that means someone else can actually complement that universe and build something on top, right?
Absolutely, yes.
And I think for me, that's also what's amazingly fascinating with on-chain gaming.
So and there's build a client on top, another client on top of the game, and decide to
absolutely
change
you could.
Look and feel or.
Mm-hmm. And there has actually already been a few. I think there's kind of two ways to think about composability with influence. One, Julian, as you mentioned, these assets that are kind of in the Adalian universe can be used for anything. And we actually have a few games that are being built around those assets already. And then the other way, Itmar, like you're saying, building another client. We've already seen some of this as well. There's a really cool community tool called Floodgate, which is actually done something I think really creative. They're taking crews and allowing other crews to hire them for their unique skills, their higher bonuses, to do certain things. So you now have this ability to basically say, this crew is better at packing propellant into my ship. They get a more efficient bonus when it comes to filling my propellant tanks. So I'm going to, and this is, I think, an amazing part of Argent and the account abstraction and the native multi-calls that we have on Starknet. But in a single call, you have this situation where you are giving permission to another crew to access your ship's propellant tank, paying them, letting them do the transfer, then revoking permission, and ending up after all that with no custody, no concerns about somebody else holding your assets at all. But you now have propellant packed into your tank and you're good to go. And that's been developed entirely outside of the influence client. So to me, like it's a specific client to one thing, but it's already another client. And we expect to see more and more of those grow. And in fact, Floodgate is part of the grant program with Starknet. We are also encouraging projects to come build with influence. We've set aside 10 billion sway as kind of a way to incubate these projects as well.
Awesome. And maybe on the more technical side for Julian, do you see, why Starknet? Do you see Starknet as having, specifically strengths to offer to someone like Influence or a product like Influence? And why now, basically?
Absolutely. We launched on L1. It became apparent very quickly that would not work for what we wanted to do. It's just too constrained in so many different ways, and kind of began our exploration with L2s back in 2021 when they were still all quite early. But I think what attracted us to Starknet was, not just the strength of the team, but also the fact that Starks were very well suited to scaling computation. And we knew then already that what we were wanting to do on chain was just not trivial from a compute standpoint. Verifying orbital mechanics on chain, it was expensive, was exceedingly expensive. It was even expensive on Starknet for a while, but we saw kind of the vision for compute getting cheaper and cheaper, and indeed, now we've seen multiple halvings in compute cost. Now we have a situation where our transactions are a cent or sub-cent, and it's incredible. So I think that's kind of been borne out, that Starknet as a destination for these sort of heavier compute functionality, the features was the way to go.
Makes sense. And I think, Julian, if we think about the history, we have now the cost decrease, not only computation, but also storage with blobs on mainnet. We arrive at sub-cent transaction. Then we realize that when you play such a game, you are making transaction all the time, which is, of course, wouldn't be a great experience. And so we are now, Julian, pioneering session keys with Influence. Can you maybe explain, Julian, what they are, what we did on the Argent side to be able to make Influence as seamless as it is?
Yeah. So I would summarize session keys as being a key that's generated by the dApp and controlled by the dApp, but authorized by the user to do certain transaction on his account. And I think that the need for session keys came from on-chain gaming, right? When you play a game, you don't want to have to confirm transaction every 15 seconds because that kicks you out of the game. And so with session keys, you can start a session. So at the beginning, the dApp will generate a key, will ask you to approve that key. You can see it as a session token, and will ask you to approve that key under certain conditions. And if you accept, the dApp can then use the key to trigger transaction on your account. And so that means you can actually play the game and execute transaction. As Chris mentioned, all the actions on Influence, they are proper transaction. But the game, the client can actually trigger this transaction without you having to confirm them. But at the same time, your asset are still fully secured because the session key can only do the things that you have approved at the beginning of the session. And typically, these constraints, they can be timed. So you can accept a session key for, say, an hour or a day, or depending of how long you want to play. But you also constrain which methods and which contract this key can transact on from your account. So, for example, if you play on Influence, Influence will ask you to authorize a session key for a few hours, but the key and the key will only be able to touch certain methods and contract of the Influence smart contract architecture. And so that means that you're giving the right of that key to trigger transaction, but it can only do the things that you have approved. So there's no risk for this key, for example, to go and try to transfer USDC or transfer ETH, because the constraint has been set at the blockchain level. And so it's an amazing way, I think, to enhance user experience. And what's really funny, Tamar, is as you remember, we actually had that idea, I think, in 2018. And we call them dApp keys on Ethereum. But of course, back then, nobody used them. And there's never been actually a good use case. Like the tech and the ecosystem was not ready for such a concept. And I think it's amazing to see it finally come to production with Influence. So I'm actually really excited of this journey from 2018 to now 2024, finally seeing this concept, come to life.
It was actually at HCC that I remember we presented them. Yeah. And then now years later, we finally have L2 with the low cost, the throughput needed, where users would make too many transactions and session keys add value. And we'll talk about other use cases of session keys, I believe, at HCC, in actually very different in the vertical than gaming. And so we work on session keys. So Influence implemented session keys, but actually Influence also worked a lot on implementing with us our new web wallet. Can you talk, Julian, maybe a few lines on what is web wallet?
Yeah. Well, I think actually web wallet and session keys for me are a great fit with Influence. I remember, Chris, when we met for the first time, I think in SF, I remember you explaining your game. And as Itamar, mentioned earlier, you didn't mention blockchain. You were telling us our users, they are gamers. They just want to play a game. And so blockchain is just the underlying technology, but you wanted to abstract as much as that technology as possible. And so session keys is one way to do that. And web wallet is another product that goes into that direction. The idea of web wallet is to really have an experience which is on par with Web 2. Typically on Web 2, users are accustomed to creating an account with just an email and a password, for example. And so our web wallet is a wallet that's can be onboarded in any dApp, and that will let user, log in with an email and a password. But it's completely seamless in the fact that users, they don't need to think in terms of wallet. They don't need to install any software. They don't need to install a browser extension. A new users that hears about Influence will go on the Influence website and can automatically, in the website, create a wallet with simply an email and a password. And of course, get all the security and the self-custody that Argent provides. So Web Wallet is really a tool to, I think, Web Wallet and Session Key combined to really onboard Web 2 users into Web 3, because they don't even need to know they're on Web 3. They will really have an experience which is very similar to any Web 2 games.
Mm-hmm.
And Chris, were there, I think it's pretty clear how this really improved the onboarding, also the gaming experience. I feel there were other hurdles on the way, like how would user pay for transaction, etc. Can you share maybe what other things you have implemented?
Yeah, so I think our sort of dream, and I think it's coming very close to being a reality, is that the players could ultimately pay in Sway for anything that they needed to. So Sway being the in-game currency, and I think the best way to keep you immersed, keep you feeling like you're in the Adelian universe and playing, acting as a crew, hopping around asteroids in a belt, is not having to go and pay for something in ETH or Starks for gas, or pay for something even in USDC, but be able to think just about, I have Sway, and that's what I'm using to pay. And so, this direction that we're moving in now towards Paymaster is incredibly exciting. Fee abstraction to where Sway can be used as a fee token, I think is an incredible opportunity, and it's something that we're working on, obviously with Argent, to try to move towards relatively soon. But I think even in the short term, Paymaster provides now this opportunity to have fee subsidies, potentially to allow for players to play for free. When I say for free, I mean without having to pay for gas. Of course, they're still going to buy a crewmate or buy an asteroid, buy some Sway to play in the game, but they shouldn't have to think about gas. It's not a fun aspect of anything. I don't think anybody has ever said, I really want to pay more for gas or play with my gas settings more. So being able to take that out of the equation completely is huge. Because I think between Web Wallet, Sessions, and Paymaster, you're right. Nobody will know or need to care that they're playing with crypto or playing on blockchain. Then we get the great job of only sharing with them the benefits, which I think is a huge level up.
Yeah, I think you mentioned it well. That's really the trifecta of user, making the wallet invisible. And I know we talked about how important was get abstraction. When the transaction 1 cent, you feel like it's okay, I can have 1 cent of ETH or Stark, but actually you might just not own any ETH or Stark. You just want to play the game. And so just acquiring those 50 cents of ETH that you would need to play the game is actually quite a big pain. So
yes.
We're quite excited to get rid of the wallet in some way here. Really looking forward for that. So to that, maybe in terms of timing, when are you ready? And, a long development phase. You've polished that to an amazing level. Yeah. When is the big day?
Yeah, so June 27th, a week from today. Actually, a week minus 3 hours, and we'll be live.
Are you ready?
So it's exciting.
Very exciting.
Yeah, we've gone.
Anything in store for users? Anything planned for launch?
Yeah, so I think we've got a lot of exciting missions planned. There's a really cool. There's some really cool missions that are focused on the community. There's some great missions that we have that are going to be focused on settling on asteroids, and then we have a really great in-game event system. So when you're playing, just by virtue of you playing, the Adelian Prime Council, the sort of governing body in Adelia, is basically offering subsidies for you to do certain things. So they're encouraging you to go out to your asteroid and build something. They're encouraging you to mine and extract materials. It's kind of our way of starting the flywheel of the Adelian ecosystem. And so I think there's going to be a lot of great opportunities early on. To me, though, one of the biggest opportunities is, and it's, I think, quite unique, MMOs don't launch often, and certainly not MMOs where you can actually build things and it impacts the long-term environment. But I think it's a really exciting opportunity to just be there early and start to build this civilization in Adalia. What you do will forever be on chain. You'll forever be able to add descriptions about that event. You can tell your own settling story and even have that be stored on chain in IPFS. So I think there's a lot of really exciting opportunities to be involved with Influence at launch.
So interesting. It means someone who plays next week in some way will be playing a different game than someone joining in 6 months or a year from now.
Yep.
Yes. The life of this universe will have evolved, and you won't be taking the same actions or playing the same strategies. It will be a different game over time.
Yeah, and I think that's a really exciting idea, to have this sort of evolutionary game that isn't static, that doesn't start with a bunch of NPCs in a certain area in the game, and that's kind of how it always is. You play a lot of MMOs, and that guy that sold you an axe is still standing there, 5 years later for whatever reason, looking exactly the same. There are no NPCs in Influence. The players are everything, and so the universe will evolve with them continuously.
Interesting. So for the listener, NPC is basically a bot. Well, it's when you play against the computer. So in Influence, you only play against real humans. Or do you believe actually people will build their own NPC, their own bot to work for them? If I have some time to wait a week to build something, maybe I will want to hack my own strategy, my own AI agent that will do the work for me.
I think it's quite likely. And we've played around a lot with the idea. Obviously that's a struggle that many games go through, traditional games that implement, anti-cheat, anti-botting. By and large, they always fail. And typically, in my mind, they end up rewarding those players who are best able to avoid the anti-botting and anti-cheat mechanisms. So it ends up sort of ironically doing the opposite of leveling the playing field. So in my mind, I think it's our job to build a game that prioritizes human thought and human strategic thinking over longer timescales, to the point where bots can't gain such an outsized advantage. And we've done a lot of building in Influence systems to make it so that it is not so grindy, so that most of what you're doing is thinking about what's my next step, even to the point where you could come in and play for 15 minutes and then spend the rest of the day, going to the park or having a nice meal or whatever, but still be thinking about like, what am I going to do next? And you can still have a very fulfilling experience without sitting in front of your computer for 8 hours.
Awesome. No, very interesting. I think I want to take some questions from the audience, but I think first, I'm hearing that you have some asteroids to give away.
We do. So
more about that?
Yeah. So we have 3 asteroids that we'd love to give away on Starknet for launch. So we're going to pick three lucky listeners. All you need to do, comment on this post, retweet the live stream, and then we'll pick 3. Make sure that we'll reach out, and you'll need a Starknet mainnet address so that we can send them to you. So if you don't have one already, get an Argent account.
Awesome. And by the way, on the live audience, please share your questions in the comment section. We'll take some of those questions and making sure we get time to answer them. Actually, there was one related to the asteroid. What's the cost of an asteroid?
Yeah, that's a good question. So crewmates are $5. Asteroids vary widely. So they start at 90, and those asteroids at $90 have about 15 buildable lots. But they then vary all the way up to the second largest asteroid in the belt, which, similar to Adalia Prime, has almost 1 million lots. It's almost 1 million kilometers of buildable space. And that one is quite expensive. I think it's something in the $1.5 million range. So there's certainly goals to be set.
Okay.
I think previously we have had Asteroid sales, and I think that the most expensive one to be purchased was, well, I'll have to look to be sure, but it was at least $250,000. So there have been some pricey Asteroids purchased, and I know that we have alliances built around some of those now that are going to be settling them quite heavily. That'll be an exciting aspect of gameplay to watch.
So are we up to come next week to get the cheaper lots while they last? I think back some question around the UX of on-chain games and in general. I mean, if you look at what we said, you have Influence. I mean, beautiful game, amazing UX. With Argent, we built the web wallet. It's so easier onboarding, the session keys, seamless gameplay. You have we didn't mention them actually. Avenue, who built the Paymaster. Avenue, which is the DEX aggregator, the largest DEX aggregator on Starknet, built the technology allowing you to subsidize gas or paying the gas in Sway. With that, we have what I think is great experience. What is the remaining UX shortcoming still to be solved?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think when it comes to blockchain, there are still some. There's always going to be some usually economic game around the cost of gas and how much it costs to run a transaction. And we see that on Ethereum frequently, where you will submit a transaction that for whatever reason gas spikes and the transaction fails. That, I think, is probably one of the remaining pieces that can still be quite confusing to a user who is not blockchain native. We've done a lot to try to help smooth that over. Argent has also done a lot to kind of present that information in a friendly way. I know Starknet is moving towards those errors also being friendlier and easier to understand. But I think that's still a challenge. You go through a game typically, you don't run into that same situation where something didn't work and you have to think about resubmitting an action maybe as frequently as it can happen in the blockchain space. So that's one area of focus for us. I think the other one is, to be honest, the generally onerous KYC process to just be able to pay with your credit card on on-ramps. I don't know if that's something that we here can address, but it is one of the drawbacks in getting people onboarded into crypto.
Yeah, I agree on I think the moving from the traditional world to your first crypto is definitely a blocker, and people have asked us why we took some of the approach we took for web wallet. And one thing that's quite unique about web wallet is your web wallet within Influence would be the same web wallet, the same account that you might use in another game. And the idea is that if you have put some money there, you can play several games. The account is there. You don't need to create a new account and again on-ramp there. So hopefully as it grows, we'll have more users ready for their on-chain journey.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. Only make them overcome that hurdle once.
Exactly. I think that's it. On the gas and the errors, I think a few things will happen this year. I mean, first we'll still see cost reduction on Starknet. As important is throughput. People always think cost and throughput as two different things, but actually the reason chains get expensive is there's too much activity, and therefore you reach the limit and the cost has to start increasing. But with Starknet bringing parallelization in the next month or two, then Kero native end of the year, we'll end up with probably many hundreds or close to 1,000 TPS in throughput, and that means very unlikely to reach that limit, and ability to keep the cost down will be important to keep abstracting gas basically as long as possible.
Yeah. But I think there's also some technical solution. For example, on L1, we used to subsidize transaction and use relayers. We could actually replay transaction for the users. So you can imagine that Avenue, as the next upgrade, basically will give you a quality of service. And so because you specify how much you're willing to pay for the transaction, they will replay the transaction until it succeeds, to make sure that it's completely abstracted to users. So I do believe that these hurdles, they will be solved very soon.
And I think, I don't know if you're aware, Chris, but probably the most exciting upgrade coming this summer, because it's the pre-confirmation time. Right now, it can take 10, 15 seconds for you to know if the transaction went through. By the end of the summer, we'll be at more 1 to 2 seconds. And so it will be almost instant to know. And that will help us improve the experience quite.
And block times as well coming down is great.
Exactly.
I know the people who have played with us in pre-release will remember the waiting for block that we've had to show occasionally, because we were dependent on the timestamps. We have these actions that can run over the course of hours or days even, and you get to the end and you're like, all right, I'm ready to build my next extractor, and now why can't I?
Yeah, I think this will all be by end of August. I think this will all be behind. So
yes, absolutely.
Awesome. I think I've been through most of the questions, and it's about time to wrap up. So as a summary, everyone should be ready in 7 days minus 3 hours, I believe. Influence will be live. Influence will be live on mainnet with a smooth onboarding with Web Wallet, with session keys, with Relay Paymaster, so subsidized transaction, I believe. A lot of exciting stuff to be looking forward to. So get your wallet ready. Really, really exciting. Follow probably best ways to follow Influence on X to be ready for the launch. Chris, any last word?
No, I think join our Discord. There's a lot of active conversations going on right now. A lot of people strategizing, joining alliances, figuring out where they fit in Adalia. So please join us. And I'm excited to have you all next week. And
awesome. Thanks so much, Chris, for joining us. Julian, thanks a lot. Looking forward to next week.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Chris.